I had an opportunity to interview and then do a walking morning meditation in Costa Rica with a former monk named Cory Muscara a couple of years ago. And so today, when I came across a YouTube interview on him talking about surrender as I'm preparing for a study group on the topic this weekend, I had to jump in and see what he had to say on the topic. So one of the things that Cory talks about is that when we go into meditation, it has that ability to anchor us in to a place where peace is not contingent on our external circumstances. And, when quite often when I've been in discussions about the topic of surrender, the question often comes up, how can I surrender to God without knowing what the outcome is going to be? And there's this common belief that God is out here. And all of the spiritual wisdom that I've read, and where I first learned about surrender through Michael Singer, talks about, our experience of God being within us. And so it's that process of going inside where we can actually hear deeply the guidance and wisdom that we're meant to follow if we're following a path of surrender. And so as Cory went into sharing his experience about spending 6 months in a monastery, he began to unpack what this process looked like for him. And it was really interesting to hear him talk about the experience of noticing the distinction between primary pain, or that, physical lived experience that we have, and secondary pain being the pain that's layered on by our thoughts about the experience. And so if you think about an experience where something is uncomfortable, and then as it circulates over and over in your mind, it becomes more uncomfortable because of what we think about it and the emotions that are generated by our thoughts, that's the secondary pain. And that made me think about, Viktor Frankl's, between stimulus and response, we have the power to choose. And it's in that space that we get our human choice to either suffer from what's happening, or, as Cory talked about in this interview, through the, Buddhist Vipassana retreat principle that he was practicing for 14 hours a day, to say, noticing the secondary pain, our mind layers on whatever experience we're having. And in that space, that gives us agency to observe the thought, label the experience, meet it for what it is, leading to less triggering emotions or feelings about it. And that seeing that, kind of full cycle from, kind of when the initial experience happens to being able to add a few steps that get us present and then release the secondary, thoughts that tend to cause us a lot of pain, allows us to go into that place of, just being with what life presents to us. I find myself in a season of life right now where life is presenting some really deeply challenging financial circumstances. And it is a daily practice to notice them and return to that thought that God's got me. And, there's a learning curve to all of this. I'm sure there are people who, have a traumatic or a shifting life experience that causes it to, kind of in an instant be like, okay, I can surrender into what's happening. I've had that, kind of near-death experience or something akin to that, that opens up that new pathway. For me, it has been a slow burn, and it's an everyday practice of learning to surrender a little bit more and believe that I'm held, regardless of what the external circumstances say. Seeing these differences between our primary and secondary thoughts can be really liberating. And that's the type of liberation that's available to us within the experience of surrender.